This is Maharajas of Scale, a podcast where we go behind the scenes and talk to founders who are demolishing the myths around building and scaling a big business in India. These are the stories that have shattered the assumptions around Indian consumers and are changing the game completely. I am Krishna Jonakadla, serial entrepreneur, co-founder of Flit, the fashion locator in town, and startup mentor, bringing you these stories. Hey everyone, this is Krishna, your host at Maharajas of Scale. Today I have an amazing guest with me. In fact, a buddy and a fellow of Startup Leadership Program. We are both alumnus of Startup Leadership Program. But I think I haven't yet done anything on the scale that Kinner has done or is doing. Kinner runs a platform called Nourish. And when I looked at his platform, something else that was happening today with my own podcast, the kind of tools that were available, I realized that I think the world is coming to a stage where creating is getting more and more easier thanks to people like Kinner. The only thing that we need to be doing is actually tap into that muse that exists within us. So if you are someone who has something to teach the world, Kinner has a ready solution for you, and he's helping thousands of people get their ideas and dreams off the ground. Kinner, it's so awesome to have you. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Krishna. You've been too kind in your appreciation. We're just trying to enable passion entrepreneurs or people, like you said, knowledge entrepreneurs get better at launching their ideas and not just keep them within themselves. So happy to be here.
Awesome. So tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure. So I think let me pick it up from the backstory. Now, me and my co-founder started our first company in consulting space, and most of our clients were education brands. So we were helping foreign brands like Cardiff Met, Lisa from Paris, and some of those large entities from Middle East to expand globally, especially coming to India. And we figured at that time, this is back in 2009 and 10 types, when we were running that organization, and we realized all of this was going to go online. And we could see the real impact in all those ventures could be when people like you and me with expertise in some domain could start teaching to people, so start teaching the world. And that could only happen if we did not have to hire developers, designers to help us build our businesses online. So that's where the idea germinated, and that's how Nourish was formed. We basically wanted to make it super simple for anyone to just launch their academy, start teaching or sharing their knowledge. So that's kind of the backstory.
Excellent. Interesting. But people who are in consulting in those high pressure careers don't usually end up starting companies. You and I are exceptions.
Oh, I didn't know that. I didn't know that
point in time. But what's the so KPMG and a lot of consulting in the US, especially business consulting. But let's dig in a little deep. What was the first?
No, that was called Scientity. And Scientity was started from the campus of Newcastle University as a spin-off. So I had my head of school at the School of Biology who just told me that, we have a project here where we want to expand our outreach internationally. So why don't you go for it? And, here is the office key to the next door office and you guys start. Because I used to talk to him all the time about that we want to get started. So that's how the first company was formed. And this was a consulting setup. We grew it to kind of a decent revenue, 20 plus people, clients from Europe, UK, Middle East. So that's what we did for a very long time. And then eventually we expanded beyond education, started helping technology companies like Carrier, Pratt & Whitney, Boeing, large organizations launch products. And we would do design consulting and launch consulting for those guys. So that was the first venture.
Interesting. before I ask you where exactly that venture went and why you ended up starting this, let's what was the spark for entrepreneurship?
Oh
What
well,
was the
okay.
first
So I had seen my dad, go through the grind. I mean, he left his job of being the head of a multinational company in the medical products domain when I was just probably 2 years old or something, and then I'd seen him go through the ups and downs of entrepreneurship. But I think the possibility in your mind develops when you see somebody else doing it. You can do it too. So I'd seen success or no success. I mean, he made a decent company with about 100 workers in a manufacturing setup. It's a manufacturing unit that he still runs, by the way. He's 70 and he's still not hung his shoes. He's still at it. So that kind of gave me the thought that I wanted to do something of my own. And I think entrepreneurship is a skill. I mean, I feel a lot of people feel it's a fancy position to be in, or a career choice that you should make because you want to go after the big money. I think there's a lot of grind that you have to go through, but it's just like some people like to be dancers and musicians. I think that's how entrepreneurship should be chosen, because it's just a different way of life. Like we and you would probably agree with me, Krishna, that we do crazy stuff like accounting at some point of the day, marketing at some point. I just built my financial model, projections, spoke to investors, prospective investors. So I think it's the craziest day that somebody would have in like a long time, and we live that day over and over again every single day. So I don't know. That's the story, and I like that. So that's why an entrepreneur. By the way, the only job that I did before I became an entrepreneur was being a scientist in a lab, working on DNA and microbiology, and I was a molecular biologist right after my masters at Newcastle in UK only. But I figured that I wanted to see stuff that I could build, so that's how.
Right. Interesting. So let's finish off the dad part. Amazing. More power to him at 70. Most people hang up their boots by that time. But I'm of the opinion that there is all of that is just in popular domain. People who are really passionate about what they're doing, for them there is never hanging up boots in their whole life, right? It is what gives them that life. It is what gives them that vitality and energy. And the day you stop doing what you passionately believe in, that's the day in some sense you decay, because that's the natural process of the world. Jerry Seinfeld, who's a famous comedian you may know, doesn't stop creating comedy just because the sitcom, the Seinfeld that he was in and helped create, has actually ended. He continues to work on comedy. But otherwise, let me ask you this. There is something in that particular inspiration. You saw your dad. One aspect of it was that you realized that you could do it, but there are some other aspects that attract as well. Maybe it's how that person deals with people. Maybe he's able to command a degree of respect, or maybe he's living an independent life where you are saying, okay, I see maybe neighbors, I see people going to a job and come back, but looks like my dad is the lord of his domain, so to speak. Were there other aspects that sort of struck a bell? And
Great question, Krishna. I'd never gone that deep to think about, what in his lifestyle or in his maybe actions inspired me. And I think if I were to talk about that, I did not like the manufacturing business that he was into. I like automation, I like technology, and when I want to build something, I want to automate things, less human intervention. It should scale by itself. It should build by itself. I love what WhatsApp could do with 17 people, and a manufacturing unit is on the other spectrum of it. So I think possibly it was for him to be independent, for him to be recognized for what he was creating. And he was in a medical disposables business, manufacturing plastic, all the plastic equipment and tubes and stuff that goes into patients. And the passion that he had, and I remember one thing that he would always tell me is that the amount of effort and honesty that I put into this business is so much that if my own son was in an accident somehow, I would not feel guilty that my equipment is going to be used on him. So, some of these things, like his ability to be the creator of something beyond just being in a day-to-day job of somebody telling him what to do. I mean, he was deciding on things. And now I've realized in my own journey, and then you're never in that position of complete true freedom. You're always either responding to customer needs or to the market needs, investor needs at times, right? But I think you still have a degree of freedom to create. That's what I think is the most exciting thing for me.
Interesting point, and I'll put my own touch on it in a second. I want to go back to what you said a few seconds ago in terms of what most people do in lifetimes or maybe in a single job. You live that aspect every single day as an entrepreneur. I usually give a metaphor that in any startup that you work, you do things in a year what you normally do outside in 5 years or even 6 years, 8 years, because the learning curve is just so steep, right? I commonly give the example of this pizza metaphor. If the whole team got together last night and then we ordered pizza because we were working late, the way in a normal job it happens is the following morning you come to office, the pizza box has disappeared magically. Somebody has disposed it off, to the extent that there is that invisible hand that has gone through that. But when you come to a startup the following morning, you'll still see the pizza box there. You'll still see all the remnants, which means all of those things you need to take care of yourself. So that's how startups are. But that also means that you are the master of your own destiny, right? So there's so much that you can determine, and that depending upon where you are in life and what your outlook is, that could be a burden or a curse, or it could be a burden or a boon. If you are somebody who wants to determine his own destiny, yes, you have all the tools, but also means that you have so much more responsibility. I usually when I was in banking and financial services, I'm still in fintech now, but way back when I was in the solutions and biz dev side, I used to wonder how, funnily, in a normal bank, a teller or a cashier, as we call them here, has almost no freedom. So they clock in at 8 o'clock or 8:30 in the morning when the bank opens, and then sometime around 3:30 or 4 when the bank closes, they have to man those counters. And in places like the US, you don't even have lunch breaks. In India, they conveniently put up that lunch break and then disappear for lunch break, although that scene is changing in private banks. And that teller, possibly at that point in time, was earning a little more than minimum wage, right? So they were earning $50,000. On the contrary, the bank manager possibly earns 3 or 4 times the wage of that teller, but the bank manager is free to move about. And what most people don't see is the degree of responsibility that the two individuals have, right? While the teller is largely constrained and then he or she is actually stuck to that, their responsibility is also so much more smaller. All they're doing is just managing that counter. But on the contrary, the bank manager has to manage the entire branch, is responsible for the business. So an entrepreneur's life is very similar to that. So you have a great degree of responsibility, and so with great freedom, they say comes great responsibility, right? So most people only pay attention to the freedom.
You put it really well. I completely agree with you. I mean, the responsibility bit probably for some people is another kick. They want to be the masters of their own destiny, and I like the way you put it. I think that's another lucrative point that we are able to see and focus on, and that's what really Nourish enables. Right. So the whole point here is that we can let more people be the masters of their own destiny. Start up as entrepreneurs, and they don't have to wait for basically just planning a large venture. I mean, some of the people who started on our platform have gone from zero to a few $1,000s in under 2 to 3 weeks, including a 16-year-old kid who made about 5 lakh rupees in just under 6 to 7 weeks, teaching other students how can they write essays to get into good universities. So amazing examples.
Wow. So let's we'll come to that. So tell us what sort of scale you are at right now. What numbers?
We have a freemium model, multiple plans to choose from. We also do enable people. Sometimes they come asking for premium plans and ask for huge discounts because they can't afford it or they are professors, teachers. In total, we have so far gone to empower close to 17,000 academies. The public number is still 16,000 because
Oh my
we
God.
update it on a monthly basis. There are amazing stories there.
Okay.
Hundreds of domains. Learners from around 37 countries come on these academies, and monthly active users have crossed or are touching about 300,000 people. So it's not the total registered user base. This is like people who seriously learn on these platforms.
Right.
Yes.
These are people who are engaged, not a million people who visited, but only 30,000. But this is real. These are real engaged
Yes, so
users
about
who are learning from
300,000
those courses.
users who are engaged.
Wow, that's amazing. Any light you can?
So I mean, again, I wouldn't want to come close to like talk about a lot of revenue numbers because we are closing a round right now, and I mean this information is
Okay.
still under wraps till we close the round, and it kind of becomes public. But at the same time, I can talk about. So we have crossed. We're touching close to 1.5 million dollars of GMV made through these academies in the last 10 months, 9 to 10 months. Um, no, this is the total GMV,
And this is
but
monthly.
you have to know that close to 55 to 60% of transactions go offline. So this is the online recorded transactions. Like you would have a lot of people, large transactions happening through NEFT transfers and Paytm wallets and bank transfers. Like Thai Institute does a Thai accelerator, venture accelerator, which is quite popular. It's one of the only online venture accelerators. And the Thai accelerator
Right.
revenue all flows through their usual registration fee and methods offline. So this is merely what we have captured, fraction of the total GMV, but this is the captured online GMV for
Correct.
these academies. And also there are close to 30% courses would be free because a lot of people, also do tons of free distribution of content through our platform. There are even schools that are not selling the content, but using the platform to take their daily classes. And we've got organizations like companies teaching their employees upskilling, building induction
Okay.
programs and things like that. So there are quite broad uses for the platform, so to say.
Amazing. 300,000 engaged users, 17,000 academies. Oh my God, that's insane. And in those 17,000 academies, talk about the spectrum. What sort of creators have you seen? What sort of changes have you
Sure.
seen happen?
So close to 21% of content creators or the academies are built in the domains of K-12. By K-12, I mean the things that school students kind of learn from. And then the second largest category is professional development.
Sure.
So you're talking about leadership and skills, particularly for let's say college students to corporates and young professionals. Then we've got close to 9 to 10% on IT, information technology. We've got specific domains. Then beyond that, I mean skill development in all kinds of areas, even like people teaching how to repair refrigerators to mobile phones to all kinds of stuff. So close to out of these, there are close to 700 different categories or domains that have courses in them, unique courses. I'll give you another interesting course which I was surprised about just a few days ago. So it's called Shadi with Rich. What that means is how do you get married to a rich guy or a girl? And this has apparently done a few lakhs, so close to $3,000 in just under a few weeks. And we've had so many interesting domains. It's just mind blowing. I like to compare it with the library of the future, where all the domains you had books written on. I think online space or online entrepreneurs would surpass that or cross those domains or the number of those domains in possibly next 18 months to 2 years. So it's just amazing.
No worries. So for a lot of people in the South, they know that there is a Venkateshwara or Balaji temple in Tirupati in South India. In fact, the head priest, who is who's actually a descendant. So you have to be a descendant of the previous, a son of the previous head priest to actually serve. You're the only one. So the way the rules of that temple are that sanctum sanctorum, only the members of that family
Wow,
are
I
allowed
didn't
to
know that.
perform puja to that deity. And that was way long ago. Yes, that is like 1,000-year-old tradition, more than 1,000-year-old tradition. So this gentleman, A.V. Ramana Dikshitulu, as his name is, he's an MSc, PhD, and I think MPhil in
Wow.
molecular biology from Carnegie Mellon. And he did that, and he came back, and the call of, according to him, the call of serving the Lord was so strong that he decided to continue his priesthood profession. And recently, the previous Andhra Pradesh government had abolished that right, and the next chief minister restored it. It went through all kinds of political ups and downs. So what's with molecular biology and then the consulting business? I know you said you wanted to work on stuff that you see a direct impact in, but in most cases, one of the biggest frustrations I faced as a consultant and was because by the time I got into consulting, I'd already tried my hand at entrepreneurship. And I realized that in consulting, I would make recommendations. Most of them wouldn't get acted upon. It was in some sense a political tool to drum up some support internally. They just wanted an outsider to come and endorse the same point of view with different language, so to speak. Well, I'm oversimplifying it. Even the consulting profession is similar, isn't it? So, two questions. Where did the leap to consulting happen?
I mean, so I would answer question indirectly, but I think there's a longish answer that I need to give for this, and I've never spoken about this earlier. So, there is a field in ancient Indian studies called hieroglyphics, and also called palmistry in the
Right.
in some sects and some formulas or signs, right? So, and as well as the symbols and the symbols on your hand, palm, fingers. So it's all part of the same science, right? So
I
yeah.
didn't
So
know
let me
that,
let me tell you an
palmistry was part of
interesting
hieroglyphics.
fact.
Okay.
Now, some people, the circular holes on your fingers, they mean
Yes.
that you like to take interest
Yes.
in how many domains, so you are a jack of all trades, a master of some, and this is deep science of palmistry, when you read quite a bit, and I've gone through probably 15-20 books on the topic and spoken to so many experts. So I have holes on all my fingers, right? Like so there are chakras on all of them, yes.
Okay.
Circular. This
Circular
means,
chakras.
and very few people will be able to tell you that I have a an interest or ability to shift gears from one domain to others very quickly. It's not a strength, it could be a weakness and a strength at times, depends on how you use it. So and this gives a bit of a learning ability to the person, that you can change gears and like to dabble in a lot of things, then to become the deepest architect or the expert of one domain. So this is a part of nature that led me to experience a lot of different roles in over my life, which started with me studying medicine. And by the way, I mean, another fact about me is that I was one of the youngest patent holders in India. I invented an earthquake sensing alarm, where I sold the license to it to another company, and this was when I was in 12th standard, right? And that was a mechanical electronic device. And from there I chose to become a biotechnologist, realized that I don't like to work only on DNA. And that time also I applied for a couple of patents in robotics, because the equipment that we were using in the lab were DNA extraction machines, which were like 2 million pounds and those kind of costs. So I made like a jugaad, cheaper version of those, invented that. And then consulting gave me a lot of excitement, jumping from design to marketing strategies to working with the CEOs on how they could improve systems within their organization. So I think this is a weakness, a strength and a curse, because you like to jump from one domain to the other quickly, and that's where probably I'm trying to address your question here. Then how and why the consulting to molecular biology, because this is my kick. Like I like to learn a lot. I mean, it's a boring year for me when I haven't picked a couple of skills. So that's the interest domain. And I think entrepreneurship, specifically in what I am doing now, like I said, there are 700 plus domains now. So this is a lot of excitement, powering other entrepreneurs through technology.
Awesome. Right. 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 No, I can totally relate to that, because when I jumped into consulting, and the beauty of it was, most consulting, at least the business consulting ones, are shorter sprints, right? So they're not multi-year assignments. You do very pointed ones. You do 3 months or maybe 6 months tops. That's where they end. And my superior at that point in time used to quip that Krishna gets bored very easily now, and he's a perfect person who fits into the consulting.
Absolutely fantastic. Yeah, that's exactly how it is. And let me tell you, Krishna, I mean, I have looked at hands of people, because this was a hobby for a long time. In fact, at one point of time, I'd applied for a research project, like a PhD at Cambridge, where I wanted to connect the field of palmistry with genomics. That there is a connection to the genome that we humans carry, and a part of that has phenotypic expression on your fingers and hands. Phenotypic expression is a typical word in the world of genetics. And I mean, I ended up not going for it, because that would have gone again too deep into the domain. But the idea here is that I've analyzed a lot of hands, and people who become entrepreneurs usually like sprints in different domains that excite them. And learning is a fundamental requirement, like eating and exercising for some of the people. So
Sure. So the larger personality
right, yes.
trait there is curiosity, right? So because you're so curious, and you want to find out how things work, and you want to make things work. If anything, you're actually so fascinated by how things work and putting things together. But that's amazing.
No, it wasn't a seismograph. It was an earthquake sensing alarm. So I'll tell you, the concept at that time was, when the tremors start, sometimes they start at 4, 3.6, 3.7, and it's very tough for people to analyze that the tremors have started, and there are pre-shocks before an earthquake. So if the pre-shock is captured by an alarm,
right,
and it tells you that there could be a bigger tremor coming behind this, and you quickly move under the table or out of the house. So that was the device. It would detect small tremors, pre-shocks, and give you a warning that immediately you jump under the table or move out of the house, because a bigger one could be coming.
Wow. Man, that's at grade 12. That's awesome.
No, this was just my preparatory time for the MBBS entrance examination, and I was too bored cramming up the facts, and I decided I don't want to be a doctor. I mean, this is too much of symptomatic cramming that I'll have to do. So I figured that I use my time for something else. So that's what it was. And I remember there was a Bhuj earthquake at that time. So the year that I'm talking about. Yes, I think 2000. No, I would say no. I can't exactly recall. No, it wasn't 2002. It was probably 2000. So 2098. Yeah, 2000 or 98. And I was, I'd seen that, and I just left my studies, and this idea hit me that, and I read a bit about it, and I figured that, if there was a way for people to get it. And even now, just a few days ago, my team just was saying that, are the lights moving? Is there an earthquake? So you're never sure, right? You don't take the action quickly, because, you need to analyze. Either it's a big quake, or in a smaller one, you don't even find out if it's really happening. So that's where I thought it's an early warning system. Seismograph actually an early warning system. The scale. The Richter scale. Yes, the Richter scale.
Yeah, the Richter scale. The intensity of the earthquake. Yeah. Interesting. And then so you already said why you went into molecular. Okay.
So I think the most automated system in the world, or self-governing, evolving systems anywhere in the world, are not in computers but in human body and in organisms around us. Yeah, in nature. So that's what fascinated me, and I used to be super curious. In fact, I remember the time when I was in 8th or 9th, I used to read a lot of comic books, and I would take blood out of a frog, and I once injected it into a dog. Luckily the dog didn't die, but like a young mind trying to create chimeras. I mean, the mix of two species. So, I mean, I was fascinated, and the more I read about it while I was preparing for MBBS, I figured that I don't want to cram symptoms. I want to get into the depth of it, learn more about, how this could be learned and manipulated. I mean, how you could build systems that work in an organic and inorganic format. But when I got into it, I realized, I mean, when I did my master's in biotechnology at one of the top universities in UK, I realized that, I mean, the journey is not as simple. It's not one of creation, but of discovery. You don't create systems manipulating nature that easily. You discover things and then try to, just steer around them in very small ways. So, the entire thing around genome manipulation and all of that, genetically modified organisms is a very kind of ethical dilemma domain. I mean, people are still not sure about if it's right or wrong. And I figured at that point that, I mean, I would want to do something more interesting. And I think it's the curiosity for the next domain that had already set in, wanted to play with computing and other domains.
Interesting. So now that you touched on the genome part, I think the term self-organizing systems is a very fascinating term. Well, it sounds very boring, but for those of us who can think and appreciate the power of systems, when you start seeing these things in nature, it's very fascinating to study how they work. Maybe not at an extreme molecular or at a cell level, but the other part of in genome sequencing, right now, at least the available knowledge states that all of global population, at least the ones in Europe and Asia, when you look at it at a mitochondrial level, we possibly all evolved only from three separate ladies, not even 300. So according to that, so 3 women mothered the entire maybe 7 billion out of the 7 billion, maybe 6 billion or 6.5 billion people. And when I read news like that, I usually think we still don't know what we don't know. We only because we have this much information, we believe mitochondria is enough for us to determine that we know the origins of species, but not so. But be that as it may, so then the consulting part, then what happened with that venture? And,
so during the consulting bit, we worked with a lot of large organizations, as I mentioned, and I figured also at that time that while you are consulting, you are a part of the puzzle at all times. Unless you build a partner system and you build an organization where you're bringing on other people at the same level, and then you kind of grow that into a systematized consulting setup, which we were not interested in. I was fascinated by systems and by scaling up how to help more and more people and how to build something that runs automatically. So that's where we had started working on the prototypes of Nourish. Couple of, like, even before the launch, couple of years ago, I think the time was really 2017, early 2017, when we started building prototypes and started looking at a marketplace model or a SaaS model. Until 2019, I did not jump full time into Nourish. That's when I took the plunge, and 100x.vc invested like a small check just at that time. Just 3-4 months later, when the pandemic had hit, we had raised another round of 2.5 crores. And that kind of just strengthened the entire thought around it. And we, at the same time, we decided a long time ago that eventually consulting would be productized. Whatever we were helping people with would be automated and through technology. So that's where we completely jumped onto Nourish. The entire team of that other consulting setup was absorbed here. And we finished some of the last projects. In fact, one of the last consulting project was for one of the subsidiaries of Wipro, and we just finished it last year, late last year. So yeah, that's how the transition happened.
So in some sense, a evolution, if you will, although it's not an evolution of the model.
I would. So I mean, I wouldn't use probably the word evolution, because there's nothing better or worse in consulting or automation. I think we picked the first love,
correct,
which is automation technology. So I mean, it's more to follow your passion, and I think more excited about how can you help people do exactly the same thing. Automate their businesses. Scale up. Every single part of it should be technology augmented and driven through automated systems. Whether it's sales, it's operational delivery of your content, management of day-to-day operations. So that's what Nourish stands for, and that's what we also did.
So let's Great.
Sure.
So let's dig into the product a little bit. What you launched in the beginning and what you see now, was it the same? But because based on what you're describing in terms of automation, that is a much more of an abstract canvas and a much more abstract concept versus where you ended up right now. So talk to us about what version did you launch first, and how did you pick up feedback? What sort of experiences did you have? Did you make mistakes?
Well, first answer to did we make mistakes is actually everything is a mistake. There are probably a few things that go right in between. So it's like that, because I mean, in retrospect, when you look at things, you feel like, okay, that could have been done better. So I think everything's kind of a try, and it could be termed as a mistake, but then you get things right. And yes, the first version that we launched was a basic version where you could not even build your website or app. Now you could build your entire business operation there on the site. So we had like fixed templates that you could use, and I'm talking of 2019, early 19. You couldn't build all of that. So we had like basic MVPs that we had companies trying on, because we had consulting partners, and we would now and then forcing them to experiment, play with the product, and constantly listening to feedback, comparing it, why they did not go for it. And at that time, most of the people would not go for it. One of the reasons was we were trying to also be an LMS, like just solve the problem for training delivery within organizations, because that's right, who the target audience was in the consulting setup for. But we eventually figured out that the real passion lied in helping people solve the problem of sales. So then the product started taking a completely different shape. We figured that the real success of any business, whether it's consulting or what Nourish academies do, are eventually building effective sales funnels. So the product started taking a shape where our goal started becoming how can they build better sales funnels, and what are multiple sales funnels that different businesses use. In fact, this is one of the favorite domains right now. I'm fascinated by sales funnels, and I think in nature also everything's a funnel. From the sperm trying to find out of millions of sperms trying to get into the egg, one gets in. Everything that you see around is run through funnels. And in fact, I see the funnel that you could run on what we are talking about right now. This project to when you go to events, to when let's say a teacher is talking to 50 students or using WhatsApp. So I see funnels everywhere now, and that's what the product's direction has become. It enables people to build funnels, and we have learned this by constant feedback. So we talk to every time somebody rejects, is a churn, they go to another platform or build a little piece of themselves, we always go and talk to them. We never try and miss that. So my comment there is every time, let's learn what's the reason, let's learn what's the feature. And at the same time, we are at Nourish, our acquisition funnels for customers are exactly the same funnels that are the funnels for any academy on Nourish. So what I'm trying to say is that the methods, the technology, the traffic channels, none of that changes. And this has been the favorite domain of learning for me for the past, I think, 8 months or 9 months, not in the beginning. And then I realized once I started seeing a lot of teachers and experts come online, I felt, they could teach. Like they all like to distribute knowledge, and, like we say in the Indian language, they're all gurus and they like to distribute gyan. But the ability to sell is 2 out of 100. That's what we had to nail. Down here, how can we increase that ability multiple times? Like, how can we help people become better sellers? So the entire course and the entire direction started changing from there. In fact, the product design is also moving into becoming a funnel builder for online courses. That's the idea, that how do we get you to say.
It's such a, I would say, I don't even, if there is a term where I could use, less understood even less understood part of less understood, especially the funnel concept and understanding the psyche, because there's so many aspects in it, isn't it? There is understanding the psychology of the people that are going to come on it, understanding their desires, tapping into their wants, getting copywriting correct, making the right offer, because you cannot make a big offer too soon. You have to move them through the funnel in the right way. You have to make sure that you capture the right people at the drop off points in each and every stage of the funnel. That means you have spent a great deal of time thinking, understanding the conversation that goes into the mind of
So there are two angles to what we do, Krishna. There is one that I learn it for ourselves, like how can Nourish build and attract more people who come on the platform. The second part is the science of it. And as a scientist, basically I like to decipher the basic understanding of the fundamentals of a domain. So I've personally read probably close to 15-20 books on this domain in the last 7-8 months, and I like to read a lot. And some of these have been like the early understandings of Ogilvy. Where Ogilvy on advertising talks about the basics of what are the different stages, awareness, consideration, and conversion. And believe me, some of the best guys, performance marketing agencies to ad agencies that I meet, don't understand or implement the basic fundamentals, right? So it's like one of the stories that one of the best sellers on our platform, told me and spoke about is, so when somebody like a large organization is trying to sell a toothpaste, and let's say the toothpaste has salt, we all have heard of a toothpaste that's got salt. Now, you can't just get the audience to see the toothpaste in the store and expect they'll buy it. But most of the people try and do that when they show an ad to someone saying, toothpaste with salt, buy now. Doesn't make sense, right? So what does Ogilvy say? How do you run and build a funnel here? The first stage is awareness. Show them hoardings, television advertisements, radio campaigns. Let them know that toothpaste with salt can make your teeth stronger. And they've heard it, right? Now the second stage, when they drive into a store, make sure your product is available in the store, and there are canopies or basics, hoardings or something put in the store, which is consideration. Remind them it's available here. The third step is give the incentive to the store so that the paste is in reach. They can pick it up and put it in their bag, the shopping bag. So that's conversion. And this is the basic idea of sales funnels. You're running it, whether it's online, whether it's digital, whether you're running it in the real world, you go through the same funnel cycle when you're trying to sell something.
Right. I'll share two very interesting stories, but I'll come to that in a moment on this part. Let's talk about the beginnings a bit. And I want to still unpack this funnel thing a little more, because it's a very fascinating concept, and it is a simple concept, which doesn't mean it's easy to do. It's a simple concept, if mastered, can make huge impact even for the very small.
This is for everybody. I mean, I would say you are selling basic, let's say on an auto rickshaw, you're selling maybe any kind of newspaper or a bottle of milk or a glass, whatever your product or anything else be. You have to utilize the funnel. You have to understand how they work.
Right. We'll talk more about that. But how did you fund first the consulting business and this one? And if I remember correctly, you almost went bankrupt in the first iteration that you were building Nourish, isn't it? Lost the first check, so to speak. So go into that a little more, and also talk about the initial journey when you launched, because I always like to touch upon, there are two kinds of products I've always seen. There are products that launch and they pick up traction, but most entrepreneurs hide the backstory for some reason. They want to give the world the impression that I launched and boom, it worked. And we play into the hands of the media that wants to portray everything as an overnight success. So how did you fund, and what were the initial days like? 16,000.
So the story was basically combined with the consulting package at that time. The consulting businesses don't need to get funds. It's like there were times when I would go to
Right.
to a client and pitch that we could do this for you, and they'll be like, how it's done. We'll tell them we've done it for these guys. Here is the advance check, you pay us. So you're really not raising any funds for a consulting setup, especially at a boutique level. I mean, unless you wanted to open 3 offices in 2 countries and stuff like that, I mean, you're not going to need heavy funds to raise and work on that. So we were channeling part of those consulting revenues into Knowledge. So there was never a day when we would say that we struggled to fund it and keep it operational. At the same time, there were only 2 full-time people working on Knowledge, and for a very long time. So just the head of VP of engineering that we have, Abhimanyu, has been with us for a long time now. And before we even built the SaaS product, he was there just thinking of, like a marketplace or something that we would build. And in fact, we had even hired a third-party tech shop to build the first prototype. So the first prototype was done outside, and we didn't have any tech talent in-house because we were just doing consulting. So there was no tough day like that, so to say, because we were consulting. However, at the same time, a lot of times it would hit us that there's no revenue coming, right? I mean, you're building it, spending a decent amount, which you could actually have bought a flat with. Personally, I mean, in a consulting setup, invested in real estate, or I mean, do whatever with it. So yes, there were tons of times when we were really worried about, will it ever pick up? Will it ever? I mean, we had gone 50 lakhs in, close to 50 lakhs in the development phase itself. And we used to think a lot of times, I mean, is it worth it? We could have invested it for marketing of our consulting services itself. I mean, this is a decision we had to kind of decide on. And just instinctively, we understood that, no, the time will come. It's inevitable that online will become more powerful than offline. So that's the reason we kept working at it. Yes, there was a time when we had hope of getting funded while running the consulting setup through a government organization, that kind of announced a competition, and only at the idea stage. We were just an idea and a prototype at that stage, but we went through several rounds. This was a skill development, innovations competition, and we won it. It was announced in the newspaper, but because of the regime change in the organizational structure there, and things that were out of control of our hands, the money never hit the accounts, and we never chased it beyond a few weeks, because I mean, we realized it's very tough to match pace with or understand the nitty-gritties or the mechanics of how governmental operations can be molded, and there was no interest to learn that too. So we quickly moved on and started focusing on what we were doing well. And that's one of the beliefs. I think you've got to focus your energy on where you believe the positive outcome will come. I mean, there's no point trying to run after a thing that didn't work, or the system that didn't work as per your expectations. So yes, that was a time. But then after we got a validation with 100x, that gave us a lot of confidence that, okay, the time is right. And the pandemic wasn't in sight at that point of time. The investment came in December 2019. And the second round also had been closed before the pandemic lockdown was announced. The money came 2 days after the lockdown. So that was like kind of very, this was an interesting time. And in fact, I said no to a major fund, which had confirmed that they wanted to invest in us, but I said no to them because I was going ahead with somebody who was ready to give the money quickly. So now look back at it, I feel good things happened because I think our intentions were good. We just wanted to kind of get into the first love domain.
So I want to peel that start a bit because you said when you won this competition, you had a prototype, which means it wasn't live, you didn't have any users yet. But when you raised this first check from 100x.vc, did you have any?
Yes, we had a little bit of revenue at that point because we had users as well. Because while we were consulting, I was still selling. We had cracked a few accounts, but they were less than 10 accounts at that point of time. Under 300-400 total academies on the platform, which included so many experiments. So yes, that's that they were there where we were the prime sellers, but there were no let's say there were no big numbers to show for at that point of time. But I mean, luckily 100x.vc's model was the first check model, so they wanted to see the promise in the product, and the product was well appreciated. I mean, my idea and my thought always is that the UI eats good features for lunch, every day. So it's like, if you focus on a good experience and a good feel and a look for your platform, you could even compromise a few features at some point of time. Of course, you've got to bring a full fight on, but this is always true. An application that looks better with even a few features missing would do well. So that was always the case. We had focused a lot on that, and whatever we had built and the kind of use cases we had were strong.
Yeah, I dig that. That's awesome. UI eats.
This is me. This is me. I'm not quoting anyone. This is me thinking it every day that that we cannot compromise on design. It's essential.
We'll put the quote out in the
Okay.
episode page and
Yeah.
say it's
Sure.
purely Kinner. It's attributable to him. So let's talk about how the 17,000 happened. You launched because for an average person, they're looking at there aren't places like yours, right? Most people think of YouTube, and for the ones that are deep inside this, they know of places like Vimeo where you could launch, but nothing comes close. None of these come close to having funnels or being able to charge, having your own audience, because you own that audience eventually, because they're all part of this while you're still a platform. There weren't the Udemy, Coursera, all these are well known. So in the beginning, was it seen as a radical product, which was way different? Which also the other side of that radical product is that it looks so new that not a lot of people are even willing to touch it. Right? So that's the other downside of a radical product. So how did the 16,000 happen, and what were
So,
the
okay, Krishna, I'll be honest here. There are a few other products in the US as well as in India that are a bit similar. Obviously, we have put a lot of effort on having a superior UI, those fine differences on how easy it is to use. So there are tons of benefits. But at the same time, I realized that we have to get into a blue ocean. I loved what Oyo had done without looking to compete with the Make My Trips or the Yatras of the world, saying, I'm just going to rebrand hotels with some basic requirements. And he did it after the master of the blue ocean strategies, Peter Thiel, guided Ritesh in that fellowship that he went through in the early days of Oravel, which was his first venture. So, and I figured helping people build sales funnels for online courses is that blue ocean, and there is nobody else anywhere in the world that's focusing on that. So our entire product is now becoming and sharpening the edges that helps you build funnels. So how did we get to the number? We kept working on the funnels. The idea was, so we experimented with all traffic channels, and funnels eat traffic. Every funnel needs a traffic source. So we experimented from Facebook to YouTube to Google Ads, organic efforts on webinars. We figured that webinars do really well. If you've got deep knowledge to distribute, that leads to tangible leads. And those leads are handed over to our sales team again through automation or through HubSpot. So our entire enterprise stack is HubSpot. Our calls are made through HubSpot. Our CRM runs on HubSpot. Our blog, our knowledge base, everything's on HubSpot stack. So and it's quite a similar promise for HubSpot. They want to help SMEs and large businesses make better inbound leads happen. So that's kind of their differentiator in blue ocean domain. So that's what we were at. We were just experimenting and learning about funnels. And I think if I was to rate 1 to 10 where we are on our journey, I think we are just on 2. If 10 is the highest goal, I'm being very honest about it. But it looks super exciting. I mean, the more deeper we get in, we are cracking things, we are learning things about funnels which are amazing. So we are trying to, and this month is going to be another radical experiment. We are going to take 80% of our efforts from completely inorganic to organic. We will generate 80% of our leads without advertisements. So this is, these are some of the strategies and experiments that are giving us excellent results.
So that's awesome. I loved the things that you spoke about, which is how you had brought in systems and then tools to enable it. But I want to unpack the 17,000 number. How long did it take?
So first 10 we had got during the consulting setup. We were, every time we would go for a consulting pitch, we'll feel like, okay, these guys could also be the users of Nourish platform. We would force it through, put it in front of them that why don't you guys do this? And that time we were not worried about how much money they were going to pay. It was just like we need people to just try it, and then just use it. So
use it, yes, yeah. And then, so in hitting those thousands, what were some key inflection points? Where did it, if you were to talk about maybe a channel or a tactic, the top 3 or even top 5 that really
so the most powerful funnel that I feel could be built for any business these days is Facebook. I think a lot of people don't understand, but Facebook has far better and stronger reach and understanding of their audience than any other advertisement platform out there, right? I mean, obviously you can drive more intent through Google because people are searching for the domain probably, but believe me, Facebook is just amazing. So that worked really well for us. Facebook was one of the biggest channels and sources, and then slowly we figured out that the funnels that you build with awareness through academic knowledge, or edutainment, is the best. So teach people what you know well, and through the consulting startup, we learned a lot of things about content creation, production of content, and whatever we were learning on funnels. So we started teaching back to people through an academy, so we have a Nourish Academy where we've interviewed people like the ex-CEO of Sony, Sanjeev Kapoor, the chef, to a lot of successful guys who do well on the platform. So we open up their secrets and people want to hear that, so that leads to funnel generation. So that's what we learned from HubSpot. You don't let any traffic go waste. You don't waste any funnel. So we started capturing those audiences, which only started happening in the last 3 to 4 months, and we've been doubling down on those efforts constantly. But that's what's kind of worked really well, so to say.
Interesting. And at what point did you feel that I think we have something that can become big? And did you wait too long, or looking back in hindsight, which is always 2020, feels like it was the right time? So when had you set any parameters for yourself where you said, okay, when this happens, I'm gonna hang up my boots?
So no, the idea was, even if I get the slightest support and spark to show that, okay, this could really work and scale well, I would jump in full time, So, I mean, entrepreneurs are risk takers, and I think it still wasn't as much of a risk as I hear a lot of other people doing, Obviously, this gets a bit scary because, you don't have that big guarantee of a paycheck coming in as it would through, if you were doing regular stuff, or, you're in a traditional setup. But yes, I mean, that's what the symbol or the signal was, that, okay, this would work.
Right. So I promised that when you were talking about funnels, I'll share 2 stories.
Focus. This is with just remind. No, the way where he's a con artist, is that the one we are talking? Yeah, long time ago, as when it came out. Yes,
that's right. That's right. So Will Smith and Margot Robbie. There's this fabulous scene where they take a Chinese businessman who's got this itch to gamble. I think it's a 5-minute scene. It's a masterclass. When you explained when you were talking about Ogilvy on advertising, that is a perfect 5-minute explanation.
Oh, I've got. Wow. So no,
great.
Thanks for suggesting that. I mean, I'd seen this movie pre-Funnel Love days, So I mean, like, I think this is old. Like, I think this is about 4 or 5 years old. I mean, the movie. Yeah. So no, this is pre-Funnel Love days.
Yes,
so
yes,
now I would dig it.
So get the subtle ways in which funnels work, especially the way you said, okay, you put up a hoarding somewhere on Facebook, somebody sees some post. Obviously, there's good loads of money involved. You don't just put a product out there saying that, okay, there's salt in this toothpaste, but you actually get people thinking, aapke toothpaste mein namak hai kya? So the weird thing about that is, when people watch that ad, because it's posed like a question, are the suggestional part of psychology such that, or psycho-cybernetics as they call it, we don't even filter out and say, okay, that's a stupid question, I'm not even supposed to be thinking about it. But it plants a seed in my mind, forcing me to think that there is something I need to think about, right? So I'll tell you a live case. I watched this film, I think around the time it came out, and 10 days ago, my wife and I watched it together, and she's seen it, I've seen it. So 2 days ago, it so happened that in the afternoon, apparently, so kids are, school is over for kids, and she's finding ways to keep them entertained, obviously get them to watch Bollywood films that are G-rated.
That's not G-rated, but yeah, okay.
So it's not G-rated, but she's like fairly harmless for them to watch because they're like 8 or 9, closer to 8 or 9, my kids. And so before I went out for my daily swim, something just struck my mind, and I said, we were discussing a few film house banners. So I told my wife, hey, do you know Dharma Creations, which is Karan Johar's banner? The opening tune for Dharma Creations is actually the tune from Kuch Kuch Hota Hai. And how much of a hit or a career-defining movie that must have been for Karan Johar, for him to take that tune and plug it into his own production house. So I said that, and I left. By the time I came back, because I stayed out late and met some friends, my kids had finished watching Kuch Kuch Hota Hai. And I told my wife, oh, it's awesome. I actually told you about Karan Johar and how he had taken the tune. And she had completely forgotten about that. And she said, no. The only reason I actually played that movie for them was because in the afternoon I was thinking about playing that movie for them. Right? So that funnel concept, so where you are exposing them to that same stimuli in 4 or 5 forms, that when you actually make that leap or decision as a user or a customer, you don't remember all of them, but they've all registered somewhere, so much so that you actually feel that it is your decision that you actually took.
So there is a 7-hour rule in marketing, what they say. So they say if you've had your target audience keep you in their mind for 7 hours, it's not important that they've consumed 7 hours of content from you. If they've kept in you in their mind for 7 hours through whatever blogs, videos, or whatever you've done, they will inevitably buy from you. Right? Doesn't matter, your product might be a bit inferior, but if they've had that long, you've helped them make the decision already.
Yeah, priming the users to hear and see what you want them to see. It sounds unethical, but it is not. It is.
So there's a great masterclass on on masterclass.com. You've got to watch. There is one by Chris Voss where he talks about negotiation, and there is another one on sales. And he talks about that if you don't learn this, you can't convince even your own daughter or son to do something that you want them to do. You're always selling. And when you're selling, you're running funnels. And, you might not want to recognize it or identify or agree to it, but you are.
Interesting. Awesome. So how did the
So Rakhi and me, we are married, so that's, we met at the university, we started our first company and then decided to get married. But beyond that, we basically, we all accidentally hired, for the consulting role. George came on board at the time, and Abhishek, who leads business development, again another SLP, and joined us in May. Abhimanyu was hired through a reference, that one of my friends kind of gave. So we slowly built that team during the consulting setup, except a few other people. The core roles were built, all like staggered timeline in the consulting time and post the product was launched full time.
Awesome. And now that I think you have more than enough validation for what you built, in effect, I see this as some sort of a big enabler, isn't it? This is not just about knowledge communities. I think when you start seeing, the way I see it is now 17,000 courses or creators, and I'm sure right now you have so much content that you can start seeing at meta level some of the things that can come out of here. So has that automation side of you kicked in and said, is there a meta course that I can start creating out of this where I can...
Absolutely. There is so much of meta learning that we identify. Let's say there is a culinary academy doing a few lakhs, and reaching out to 1,000 people. We clearly see that we can apply that knowledge to help other sellers get better and not start from zero, but start from 3. And at the same time, there are so many learnings that we are able to see at a broad upper level, where we see that, okay, knowledge of funnels, automations, and when your business starts growing, there are going to be tons about the customer service, offers, content production. I mean, there is no end to learning. And I think the most interesting part of this journey is learn it ourselves. We learn it at all times and then we share it back. So the experimentation, reiteration, and then putting that knowledge back in the hands of all content creators is what's the most exciting part of this is.
So what's the long shot with...
Okay, so I mean, what's the mission? Is that what you're asking, or what's the long-term goal?
If this were to wildly succeed,
that's an interesting question. I mean, I would say that we want to be the gold standard, not just in India but globally. The masters of the game for funnels, especially in the domain of online content. That's who we want to be, and we would say that if as soon as your eyes have opened to better sales and you want to improve on getting more clients, we would be the de facto choice. And my goal personally is to help at least 1 million knowledge entrepreneurs, because if I empower 1 million, this will lead to, if each one of them is teaching 100, which is a small number. Some of these people are teaching 10,000 and 20,000 students also. So you look at the impact, 100 million people would have been impacted by that.
It's amazing you say that. We had Prateek Singh of LearnApp some time ago on our platform, and he talked about how LearnApp, because it's for investing, was evolving into a platform that created ability versus knowledge. And when we see the so-called Nordic countries, or the Viking nations as they're called, Finland, Denmark, Sweden, so those places, they've enabled vocational courses long ago. So do you see that leap happening sometime?
I mean, I would say that we are not stuck on the domains or fields so much as generically helping creators. What my goal is, that I see funnels running so strongly to make any business successful in the training content business, that I mean, I would want to say that that's what I am empowering.
Interesting. We should have some, I think on the episode page, we'll have you share some of those sources. I know 3 or 4 very well-known ones that talk about funnels. The most popular one being Russell Brunson. And there is a slightly
I've
lesser
seen
known
Chet
figure
Holmes,
called
yeah.
Chet Holmes, who who's a master of his domain, obviously. So so you mentioned reading. You read quite a bit. What's on your reading list right now, and what's
So the
most
recent,
interesting
most
book
interesting
you've read
one
of
that
him?
I read was Becoming Supernatural by Dr. Joe Dispenza. This is about the placebo nocebo effects and how the modern science is deciphering the power of meditation and the power of mind. That's I think in the past few years I haven't read a book quite as good as this one. At the moment, I mean, so all at any given point of time there are multiple books on the shelf. Otherwise, it gets boring. So at the moment, I'm rereading. To be honest, is "Sell Like Crazy" by Sabri Subi. Great book on funnels and on business. At the same time, Culture Code is another that I'm going through. And then I love Napoleon Hill. Some of the open source books now by Napoleon Hill. So Laws of Success is like a book, like a big book by him. And I think I'm on my fourth reread of that. So yeah.
Wow, wow, interesting. What would your advice to early stage founders be?
So yeah, I think learning. The big difference that I see between people who are able to make it and who struggle, or fail to come out of struggle or are not improving, are the ones who don't learn at the right pace. And I think the pace for your learning should be so much so that you're spending at least an hour, 2 hour a day, even on your busiest days, dedicated to things that you should learn about. And the biggest issue here, usually, and the traps here is you don't know what you don't know. So the problem is, how do you find out what you don't know? So you have to constantly explore and look at models of success, people who have made it. So kudos to you. I think this is a great show that you're running at Maharajas of Scale, Krishna, because this opens some of the models and points us in the direction of what should we learn next. So that's great.
I promise just two more quick questions. Decisions that you sort of regretted making, and decisions that you thought you got right. Do you look at?
I never look at things that I mean, so I don't regret things actually. I mean, that's I feel the past is always perfect. Even the mistakes you made are the ones that led you here. So I there's nothing that I would add there. So there's no decision that I regret, because you can't change the past. So I don't exert an iota of energy to look at what went wrong. So decisions I made right, yes, sometimes I'm able to look back at things and say that, okay, this learning did pan out. So and there are multiple scenarios like that every week. So it's like the experiment went well, so this was the right direction to start the experiment off. And when you see that it didn't work, you go back and start learning it again from some other source, or run another experiment. So yeah, that's how it is.
Right. And lastly, do you ever worry or obsess that all that you built might someday end?
No, not at all. I think the kingdom that we need to take control of is mind, and I think meditation plays a super important role there. I think it should be as important as food and exercise. So I think I might try, and I think I do fail on days, but I think more than I fail, I succeed at keeping a leash on the mind running amok. And I think I like to control what it thinks and what it sees. So like to visualize things that would go right and keep it at that.
Awesome. So, Kinner, you are an entrepreneur, enabling people to launch their dreams. So many tools at their disposal. And what you're doing is not just throw a toolbox at them, but you're also telling them, hey, this is a template. This is how you actually take this toolbox and succeed, which you're doing with funnels. For people that are looking at it, I think they get that. This has been a fabulous episode. Thanks for sharing your time. I know that you're going to scale Greater Peaks, and Maharajas of Scale will come back and then talk to you to see what that vantage point looks like.
Thank you so much, Krishna. You're doing an awesome job, and Keep doing it, and thank you so much for having me on the show. Thanks. Bye.
Thank you.
We hope you enjoyed this story. If this story made a difference to you, tell us by leaving a comment on the website or our social media channels. Help us spread the love by subscribing, liking, and sharing our show. We welcome speaker suggestions and collaboration. Write to me at tanya@maharajasofscale.com.